Starting in January, we will be purchasing $75 billion of securities a month, reducing purchases of treasuries and mortgage-backed securities by $5 billion each. It's important to note, though, that even after this reduction, we will be still expanding our holdings of longer-term securities at a rapid pace. Our modest reduction in the pace of asset purchases reflects the committee's belief that progress towards its economic objectives will be sustained. If the incoming data broadly support the committee's outlook for employment and inflation, we will likely reduce the pace of securities purchases in further measured steps at future meetings. Of course, continued progress is by no means certain. Consequently, future adjustments to the pace of asset purchases will be deliberate and dependent on incoming information. Based on its assessment of current conditions in the outlook, which is informed by a range of indicators, including measures of labor market conditions, financial conditions, and inflation pressures, the committee now anticipates it will likely be appropriate to maintain the current federal funds rate target well past the time that the unemployment rate declines to below 6.5%, especially if projected inflation continues to run below its 2% goal. My expectation is for similar moderate steps going forward throughout most of 2014. The SEP shows that the 6.5% is expected by a large number of people to be reached about the end of next year, end of 2014, and then the first rate increases, according to the so-called DOTS chart, take place near the end of 2015. I have always consulted closely with Janet, even well before she was named by the president, and I consulted closely with her on these decisions as well, and she fully supports. The other kind of thing that, the only other thing I can think of that amounts to a direct infusion into the economy, if you will, is action similar to the British funding for lending program. However, somewhat differently from what was going on in the UK and in Europe, here our banks are flush with liquidity, they have plenty of cash on hand, they hold lots of reserves, of course, and so our sense was that there just wouldn't be any take-up on that program, at least under current conditions.
Well, I think logically this is what they had to do. If you look at what's happened this year, the unemployment rate's gone down to 7%. We've got housing starts over 1 million units. We've got the S&P 500 up 25%. In this economy, you have to pull back from the most extreme monetary policy in a century. So I think it's overdue. I'm glad to see it. I think we are due to move back towards normal monetary policy. Ultimately, it is somewhat negative for the bond market, but I think it should be positive for equities when people realize it just reflects an improving economy.
I think there's a general consensus that, you know what, the Fed is finally signifying to us that the economy is doing better. 2014, the economy will be a bit stronger and a bit broader, and this is just confirmation of it. This is good news for equities.
I think what we're going to see in 2014 is reasonably good growth. I mean, we don't have the fiscal headwinds or the fiscal drag as much in 2014, and we do have, you know, the deleveraging cycle of the consumer is getting towards the end, and so we are going to see some reasonably good growth, and I think the Fed is looking at that as well.